3 disturbing Airbnb horror stories. I never planned on staying there. The Airbnb was supposed to be a backup. I had been driving for almost 8 hours when my car started making a strange rattling noise somewhere outside a small town in Pennsylvania. It was already getting dark, and the mechanic I found told me he wouldn't even look at it until the next morning. So I opened Airbnb and booked the cheapest place within 20 miles. There weren't many options. The place I chose was an old Victorian house on the edge of town. The listing had only 12 reviews, but they were all positive, nothing suspicious. The host's name was Margaret. Her profile picture showed an elderly woman smiling beside a flower garden. The check-in instructions were simple. Front door is unlocked. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. That was it. No keypad. No lockbox. No codes. Just an unlocked front door. I arrived around 9:30 p.m. The house sat at the end of a quiet street surrounded by large trees. Most of the neighboring homes looked empty. A single porch light glowed above the front steps. I grabbed my backpack and walked inside. The smell hit me immediately. Old wood, dust, and something faintly medicinal. The interior looked exactly like the photos. Antique furniture, floral wallpaper, framed black and white photographs. But there was no sign of Margaret. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Margaret. "Sorry, I had to leave unexpectedly. Make yourself at home." That felt a little strange, but not enough to worry me. I found my room upstairs. It was clean. Small bed. Wooden dresser. Desk. Bathroom across the hall. Normal. I dropped my bag, took a shower, and tried to relax. Around midnight, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard a door close somewhere in the house. Not slam. Just close. Slowly. I sat up. The house was supposed to be empty. I listened for a few seconds. Nothing. Then I heard footsteps. Very faint. Downstairs. I convinced myself it was the house settling. Old houses make noises. Everyone knows that. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up around 8. Still no sign of Margaret. I made coffee in the kitchen and noticed something odd. There were 2 mugs sitting in the sink. I had only used one. At first, I thought maybe they were already there. Then I realized one of them still had fresh coffee stains inside. I stared at it for a few seconds. Maybe Margaret had been there before leaving. Maybe. Still, it bothered me. I spent most of the day waiting for updates about my car. The mechanic called around 4 p.m. Bad news. The repair would take another day. I would need to stay another night. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I didn't have many options. That evening, I ordered takeout and ate in my room. Around 11 p.m., I heard the footsteps again. This time, there was no mistaking them. Someone was downstairs, walking slowly, back and forth. I muted the TV and listened. The footsteps stopped. A few seconds passed. Then I heard something even worse. A cough. A real cough. Not from outside. Not from another house. Inside. Directly below me. Every hair on my arms stood up. I immediately messaged Margaret. "Hey, is someone else staying here?" No response. I called her. Straight to voicemail. The footsteps started again. Slow. Deliberate. like someone wandering through the house. I grabbed my phone and quietly opened my bedroom door. The upstairs hallway was empty. The staircase was at the end of the hall. I walked toward it as quietly as possible. The house was dark except for a small light above the stove downstairs. From the top of the stairs, I could see part of the living room. No one. The footsteps had stopped. I waited. 30 seconds. Nothing. Then I noticed something. There was a door beneath the staircase. I hadn't seen it before. The listing photos didn't show it. It was partially open. Maybe 6 inches. A dark gap. I couldn't remember if it had been open earlier. I stared at it for a long time. Then I slowly went back to my room and locked the door. I barely slept that night. The next morning, Margaret finally replied, "Sorry, bad reception. No one else should be there." That wasn't exactly reassuring. I told her about the footsteps. Her response came almost immediately. Probably the pipes. I knew she was lying. Pipes don't cough. That afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I went downstairs and walked over to the small door beneath the staircase. It looked like a storage closet. The gap was still there. I pulled it open. Inside was a narrow staircase leading down. A basement. The air that came up from below smelled damp and old. There was no light switch near the entrance. Just darkness. I stood there for several seconds, debating whether to go down. Then common sense won. I closed the door. That should have been the end of it. But later that evening, something happened that changed everything. I returned from picking up dinner and immediately knew someone had been in my room. Nothing was missing, but things were different. My backpack had been moved. The desk chair was slightly pulled out, and my bathroom towel, which I'd left hanging on a hook, was folded neatly on the bed. I hadn't done that. I took photos. Then I messaged Margaret again. No response. At that point, I considered leaving. The only reason I stayed was because my car wasn't ready and the nearest hotel was booked. I regret that decision. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound. A metallic click. I opened my eyes. The room was dark. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then I heard it again. Click. The sound came from the hallway, like a doorknob being tested. Slowly, carefully, someone trying to open doors. I sat frozen in bed. The sound moved closer. Click. Pause. Click. Another room. Then another. Then finally, my door. The handle moved. Once, twice, 3 times. Thankfully, I had locked it. Whoever was outside stood there for several seconds. Then the footsteps retreated. I waited nearly an hour before moving. My hands were shaking. I called 911. The dispatcher asked if someone had broken in. I told her I wasn't sure. Officers arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the house. At first, they found nothing. Then one of them opened the basement door beneath the stairs. A few minutes later, he called the others down. Their expressions changed immediately. I knew something was wrong. One officer came upstairs and asked me to stay where I was. I asked what they found. He wouldn't answer. Eventually, they brought a man out of the basement. He looked filthy. Long beard. Thin. Maybe in his 50s. His clothes were covered in dust. I had never seen him before. but apparently he had seen me. A lot. The police later explained everything. The man had been living in a hidden section of the basement for months, possibly longer. There was a small room down there with a mattress, food, water bottles, and dozens of personal items, including photographs of guests, photos taken without their knowledge. Some sleeping, some watching TV, some eating in the kitchen. There were pictures of me too, from the previous night. While I slept, the officers believed he had been coming upstairs when guests were asleep or away from the property, moving things, watching them, sometimes taking photographs. The worst part wasn't the basement. It wasn't the photos. It was what happened afterward. The police contacted Margaret. She admitted something she hadn't mentioned in the listing. A guest had complained about hearing footsteps months earlier. Another reported missing items. Someone else claimed they saw a man standing at the end of a hallway late at night. Margaret assumed they were exaggerating, or drunk, or trying to get a refund, so she ignored it. The Airbnb listing was removed within days. The house was eventually sold. But I still think about one thing. When police searched the hidden room, they found a notebook. Inside were dates, names, descriptions of guests, things they liked, things they did, when they slept, when they left. The last entry was about me. Just one sentence, written the night before the police arrived. It said, "He's starting to notice." I was 23 when this happened. At the time, I was working remotely and spending a few weeks traveling around the country. Instead of hotels, I usually stayed in Airbnbs because they were cheaper and felt more private. For the most part, I never had any problems, until I rented a small apartment in Nashville. The listing looked perfect. 1 bedroom, modern furniture, quiet neighborhood, private entrance. The reviews were excellent, almost suspiciously excellent. Every guest seemed to say the same thing. Very safe, great location, felt just like home, would definitely stay again. Nothing unusual. The host's name was Kevin. His profile looked normal. Verified account, Superhost badge, hundreds of reviews. Everything seemed legitimate. I booked 3 nights. The apartment was attached to the side of a larger house, but had its own entrance and keypad lock. When I arrived, Kevin sent me a message. "Code is 4821. Let me know if you need anything." Easy. The apartment itself was exactly as advertised. Clean, comfortable, modern. I unpacked, ordered food, watched some Netflix and went to bed. The first night was completely normal. The second wasn't. Around 1:30 in the morning, I woke up for no reason. At least that's what I thought. The room was dark, silent. I rolled over to check my phone. 1:34 a.m. Then I heard it. A soft beep. The same beep the keypad made when someone entered the correct code. I froze. Another beep. Then another. Someone was entering a code. At my front door. I sat upright instantly. The apartment was completely dark, except for a small blue light from the television. I listened. The door opened. Very slowly. I could hear it. The sound was unmistakable. My heart immediately started racing. Maybe Kevin. Maybe maintenance. Maybe someone had the wrong apartment. But who enters an Airbnb at 1:30 in the morning? I grabbed my phone and slipped out of bed. The bedroom door was slightly open. Through the crack, I could see part of the living room. At first, I saw nothing. Then I saw movement. A silhouette. A person standing near the kitchen. Not moving. Just standing there. My stomach dropped. I quietly locked the bedroom door. Then I messaged Kevin. Someone is inside the apartment. No response. I called him. Straight to voicemail. The figure remained in the living room. I could hear faint footsteps now. Slow. Careful. Almost like they were trying not to make noise. I called 911. The dispatcher told me to stay in the room and remain quiet. The longest 15 minutes of my life followed. The person outside kept moving around. Opening drawers. Walking through the kitchen. Stopping. Listening. Then walking again. At one point, they came right outside my bedroom door. I could see their shadow beneath it. They stood there for several seconds. I stopped breathing. Then they walked away. When police finally arrived, I heard shouting. Then running. Then silence. A few minutes later, an officer knocked on my bedroom door. The apartment was secure, but the intruder was gone. Apparently, they escaped through the back entrance before police entered. The officers searched the property and asked Kevin to come over. When he arrived, he seemed genuinely confused. He checked the keypad log through the smart lock app. Then his face changed. The apartment door had been unlocked using the correct code. My code. The code Kevin had sent me. At first, everyone assumed it was a glitch. Maybe the system failed to generate a unique code. Maybe someone guessed it. The police left after taking statements. Kevin apologized repeatedly. I considered leaving immediately. But Kevin insisted the lock would be changed the next morning. Against my better judgment, I stayed. The next day, a technician replaced the keypad. New lock. New code. New access logs. Problem solved. Or so I thought. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every small sound made me nervous. Around midnight, I decided to double-check the apartment. Front door locked. Windows locked. Everything secure. Eventually, I went to bed. At approximately 3 a.m., I woke again. This time because of a noise coming from the kitchen. A cabinet closing. I sat upright. Immediately. I knew I wasn't imagining it. Someone was inside. Again. I grabbed my phone and quietly walked to the bedroom door. The apartment was dark, but I could hear movement. Drawers opening. Something sliding across a countertop. Then silence. I slowly peeked through the crack. Nobody. The kitchen appeared empty. The living room appeared empty. But something felt wrong. Then I noticed the bathroom door. It was closed. I was certain I had left it open. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay where I was. Instead, I stepped into the hallway. Slowly, quietly, the bathroom door remained shut. I approached it, my heart hammering. I reached for the handle and stopped because I heard breathing from inside. Not loud, not dramatic, just breathing. Someone was in there. I backed away immediately and locked myself inside the bedroom. Then I called 911 again. This time police arrived within minutes. They searched the bathroom. Empty. No one inside. No open window. No place to hide. Nothing. The officers looked skeptical. I probably would have too. Until one of them noticed something strange. The bathroom mirror. It wasn't attached to the wall. It was actually covering a maintenance access panel. Behind it was a narrow crawl space, large enough for a person. The space connected directly into the main house. Suddenly, everything made sense. The intruder had never broken in. He had never needed to. He wasn't entering through the front door. He was using the hidden access corridor between the properties. Police searched the main house. What they found shocked everyone. A man had been secretly living inside an unused section of Kevin's basement. Not a tenant, not a relative, a complete stranger. Investigators later determined he had entered the property months earlier during renovations and discovered the maintenance passages hidden behind the walls. He had been living there ever since, moving between spaces unnoticed, watching, listening, waiting until guests were asleep before entering the apartment. The creepiest discovery came a few days later. Police found notebooks, several of them, each filled with observations, descriptions of guests, what they ate, what time they slept, what they watched on TV. Some entries went back nearly 6 months. There were dozens of names. Mine was one of the most recent. I asked detectives if they found anything written about me. One of them hesitated, then handed me a photocopy. There was only one sentence. "This one wakes up too easily." I never used Airbnb again after that trip. And to this day, whenever I stay somewhere unfamiliar, I always check behind mirrors, just in case someone else has a key. I booked the Airbnb less than 24 hours before arriving. It was one of those last-minute decisions you make because everything else is either too expensive or completely booked. I was driving through Oregon on my way to Seattle and needed a place to stay for one night. The listing looked simple. A small cabin near a lake. Good reviews. Reasonable price. The host's name was Emily. Her profile showed a woman in her early 30s standing beside a golden retriever. Nothing unusual. The reviews were all positive. Not amazing. Not suspicious. Just normal. Great communication. Very peaceful location. Emily was a wonderful host. I booked it immediately. A few minutes later, I received a message. "Looking forward to hosting you. Let me know if you need anything." Friendly. Normal. Everything about it felt normal. That feeling didn't last long. I arrived around 7 p.m. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the trees surrounding the property. The cabin looked exactly like the photos. Small porch, gray siding, 2 rocking chairs, lake visible through the trees. Perfect. A keypad lock was installed beside the front door. The access code Emily sent worked immediately. Inside, the cabin was spotless. Fresh towels, coffee pods, a welcome basket. Everything looked professionally prepared. I remember thinking this might be one of the nicest Airbnbs I'd stayed in. I unpacked my things, ordered takeout, and settled in for the evening. Around 9 p.m., I received another message from Emily. "How is everything?" I replied. "Great place, thanks." She immediately responded, "Glad you're comfortable. Nothing strange. At least not yet." Around 11 p.m., I stepped outside onto the porch. The lake was completely still. No wind. No sounds. Just silence. The kind of silence that only exists far away from cities. As I stood there, I noticed something across the lake. A light. A single flashlight. Moving through the trees. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds. Then it disappeared. Probably someone camping. I didn't think much about it. I went inside and locked the door. Around midnight, I was lying in bed watching YouTube videos when I heard a notification. Another message from Emily. "Please keep the curtains closed tonight." I frowned. That seemed oddly specific. I replied, "Why?" Several minutes passed. Then, "Wildlife." That was the entire answer. Wildlife. I shrugged and ignored it. But I did close the curtains. Just in case. At approximately 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No reason. No noise. Just one of those moments where your brain decides you're awake. I checked my phone. 2:07 a.m. Then I noticed something strange. A light. Moving across the curtain. Someone was outside. My stomach tightened. The light moved slowly. Back and forth. Like a flashlight. The same flashlight I had seen across the lake earlier. I sat motionless. The beam drifted across the window again. Then stopped. Directly outside. Whoever was holding it wasn't moving. I waited. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Do not look outside." My heart immediately started racing. I stared at the message. Then typed back, "Someone is outside." No response. I called her. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. The flashlight remained outside. Completely still. Then slowly disappeared. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I decided to leave early. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. Just a feeling. As I packed my things, I noticed a framed photograph hanging near the front door. A photo of the cabin. But the picture looked old. Very old. The cabin appeared abandoned. The porch was damaged. The paint was peeling. And written in the corner was a date. 2014. I looked at the current cabin around me. It looked completely renovated. I assumed the photo simply showed the property before repairs. Then I noticed something else. The photo included a mailbox near the driveway. A mailbox that no longer existed. For some reason, that detail stuck with me. After checking out, I stopped at a gas station about 10 miles away. The cashier looked bored, so I made small talk. I mentioned staying at the cabin by the lake. His expression immediately changed. "Which cabin?" I described it. Gray siding. Rocking chairs. Private lake access. The man's face went blank. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Nobody lives there." I laughed. "Obviously someone does." "No," he replied. "That place has been empty for years." At first, I thought he was confused. So I showed him the Airbnb listing. The cashier stared at my phone. Then shook his head. "That's impossible." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. "What do you mean?" He pointed toward the host profile. "That's Emily Walker." I waited. The cashier looked uncomfortable, then quietly said, "Emily died years ago." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. According to him, Emily Walker had owned the property. In 2018, she disappeared while hiking near the lake. Her body was never found. The story had been all over local news. I immediately opened Google. And there she was. The same woman from the Airbnb profile picture. The same smile. The same golden retriever. Missing since 2018. I felt cold. Very cold. I left the gas station and pulled into a parking lot nearby. Then I opened Airbnb. The listing still existed. The messages still existed. Everything was still there. I called customer support immediately. The representative listened carefully, then asked me to send screenshots. I forwarded everything. While waiting, I searched the property address online. What I found was even stranger. County records showed the cabin belonged to Emily's family. But there were no active rental permits. No registered Airbnb. Nothing. As far as official records were concerned, nobody should have been renting that property. An hour later, Airbnb called me back. The representative sounded confused. She asked for the listing number again. I gave it to her. Silence. Then, "Sir, that listing doesn't exist." I thought she was mistaken. I refreshed the page. The listing disappeared. Right in front of me. Gone. Every photo. Every review. Every detail. Gone. Only the messages remained. And even those were disappearing. One by one. Like someone deleting them remotely. Within minutes, my inbox was empty. No reservation. No host. Nothing. It was as if the entire booking had never happened. I still had photographs from inside the cabin. So I drove back. I wanted answers. I reached the property around noon. The cabin was there. But something was wrong. The place looked abandoned. Exactly like the photo from 2014. Peeling paint. Broken porch. Boarded windows. No rocking chairs. No welcome basket. No fresh towels. Nothing. The cabin I had stayed in the night before seemed to have vanished. I parked and walked closer. The front door was secured with chains and a padlock covered in rust. The windows were coated in dust. Nobody had entered that building in years. At least that's what it looked like. I stood there completely confused, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I noticed something attached to the mailbox post. A missing person flyer, faded from years in the sun. The photograph showed Emily Walker. Below it were the words, "Last seen near Lake Hollow, October 2018. I stared at it for several seconds. Then my phone vibrated. A notification. An email. No sender name. No subject. Inside was a single sentence. "Thank you for staying." That was 3 years ago. I still have the photos. I still have the screenshots. And every now and then, usually late at night, I search Emily Walker's name online. The results are always the same. Missing. Never found. Case unsolved. But one thing still bothers me. The last message she sent. The one about keeping the curtains closed. Because when I zoomed into one of the photos I took that night, I noticed something standing near the lake, partially hidden among the trees. A woman, watching the cabin, exactly where the flashlight had been.